Majora's Mask has been out for over 2 decades, yet there are still debates about the most basic things regarding the game, up to the point that people are still discussing what the game is even thematically about. Is Link dead during the game? Is the game about healing, about friendship, about grief, about trauma? Is it about Link dealing with his lost childhood, or about him coping with his own death? Is the game about changing identities, or about Buddhist themes like rebirth and karma? Is the game a dream, or is it literally about Link searching for Navi? What is the game even about? So my original plan for this video was to do a fun little 45-minute piece about Majora's Mask, to summarize the story, to talk about the gameplay, to walk through the game step by step, and to stop at interesting points along the way. This is not what this video ended up being, because the more I dug myself into all the mysteries of Majora's Mask, the more I realized just how much there is hidden to talk about in its story and themes. The thematic depth below the surface of this little game is honestly utter insanity. So this video will be slightly different to what we usually do around here. Instead of talking about tons of different aspects of the game, we will heavily focus on Majora's Mask's story today. We will try to answer pretty much every single one of Majora's Mask's many mysteries. The meaning of the Stone Tower, the questions of the Moon Children, the words the happy mask salesman says at the end, whether Link is dead, if the 5 stages of grief are represented in the game, the symbolic meaning of the side quests, what the 4 main areas represent, the Buddhist subtext, everything. It's my attempt to shed some light into Majora's Mask's darkness. As for spoilers, due to the premise of this video, this thing is going to spoil the entire game. Like literally all of it, including the final boss fight. Don't worry, that is not the final boss fight in the background yet, that's just a video of a simulation of how our own moon may have formed by the NASA Research Center. Alright, we got tons of things to discuss, so let's get this thing going. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a channel that hopes to give interesting perspective on great games. This is Majora's Mask. The game begins with a short intro text that sets the scene and is one of the very few instances where the game tells us its plot literally without any abstractions. We're told that we're playing as the same incarnation of Link that defeated Ganon in Ocarina of Time. After the events of Ocarina, Link left Hyrule and is currently in the middle of a forest, on Epona's back, looking for a long-lost friend. This long-lost friend is very, very likely Navi. At the beginning of Ocarina of Time, Navi joins Link on his quest to save the land of Hyrule. She's here to guide Link through the adventure. Navi is literally a short version for navigation. She's with us throughout the entire game, giving us only slightly annoying guidance until the very end. But at the very end of Ocarina of Time, Navi leaves Link behind. And, it makes a lot of sense that she does so. See, Navi symbolizes a guide that helped Link survive in the world. The fact that she leaves after Link dealt with Ganon is a metaphor that Link no longer needs any form of help. He grew so much over the course of Ocarina of Time that Navi is no longer necessary. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Link doesn't need guidance anymore. And this is where the beginning of Majora's Mask comes back into play. See, the fact that Link is looking for Navi at the beginning of Majora's Mask is a metaphor for him looking for guidance again. It symbolizes that Link is lost. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what makes discussing Majora's Mask so difficult. Majora's Mask is a game that takes place on 2 layers at once. On the one hand, the game's story takes place in a literal sense as written. It's what literally happens in the game at face value. It's Link who is literally riding on top of Epona. It's Link who is literally lost in those woods, and it is Link who is literally looking for Navi, his old friend. Awesome. So where does this get complicated? Well, it gets complicated when we add the second layer to it, because almost everything in Majora's Mask's story also has a second allegorical or metaphorical meaning. Here, Link being lost in the woods is a metaphor for Link being lost in life as a whole. On this layer, Link looking for Navi is meant to symbolize Link looking for spiritual guidance. It is meant to convey that Link is lost after living through the trauma of Ocarina of Time and that he's looking for guidance. The thing that Majora's Mask often does is to prioritize the symbolic meaning of things over telling a cohesive tale on a literal layer. I believe it's this focus on allegories and metaphors that gives Majora's Mask its weird dreamlike quality. It's great, it's truly awesome, I love it. but I also hate it, because this also means that it is a nightmare to discuss this game. One person that talks about the opening scene might talk about its literal meaning, that Link is searching for his lost friend, and this person is right, because the literal meaning of this scene is about friendship. The problem is that another person might understand the exact same opening scene to mean that Link is lost and without guidance after the events of Ocarina of Time. And this person is right as well. Two different things can be true at the same time. Mind-blowing, I know. This multi-layeredness is what makes Majora's Mask so interesting to talk about, but it also means that it is insanely difficult to discuss the game in, say, a public coliseum, where different ideas fight against each other until all ideas that ever lived died a bloody death. Like, for example, the internet. So if I'm stating that a thing is about a thing in Majora's Mask, then I don't mean that this thing is the only thing that the thing is about. If you're wondering why we're taking so much time to establish this bit of fluff at the beginning of the video, well, to be honest, it's a desperate act of self-preservation in the hopes that the Zelda fandom doesn't murder me in a second. But one homicide after the other. So Link continues to ride through the forest. He appears to be tired. After a while, two new fairies are introduced. Tail and Tattle. Those two fairies fly towards Link's horse, which scares Epona and causes Link to fall off the horse, which kills him. Link dies here. Directly afterwards, and that's kind of important, Majora and the Skull Kid appear for the first time. Alright, so before the Zelda fandom pulls out their pitchforks, lights their torches, and storms my castle in a quest to crucify me on a Mad Pet-shaped cross. Look, I am aware that Link doesn't die here. MadPat over at Game Theory made a really cool video years ago about how Link is dead during the events of Majora's Mask. It's a fun watch and a really interesting theory. There's just a problem with it. It's debunked. And while this doesn't make the video less interesting to watch, it's a fun thing to think about, even if it ultimately does not work out canonically. The video had the side effect of making an easily debunked theory mainstream, which, is a bit of a red flag for some people in the Zelda fandom. So to summarize, the main problem with the Link is dead theory. The reincarnation of Link that appears in Twilight Princess is a blood descendant of the Hero of Time. The Hero of Time is this Link here, the one lying on the ground. This Link must have had a family at some point after the events of Majora's Mask. Otherwise, this Link here can't be a descendant from him, which, probably means he isn't that dead after all. So why did I just say that Link dies here then? Well, see, the thing is the following. Even though Link doesn't die on the literal layer of the story, he does die here on the metaphorical one. Metaphorically, Majora's Mask is a story about Link being reborn over and over again, until he heals his trauma by helping others and metaphorically grows up. For this allegory to work, Link has to metaphorically die at the beginning of the game, and he has to do so before he faces Majora for the first time. I believe why the Link is dead theory sounds so plausible on the surface is because it is true, just not in a literal sense. Link dies here on a metaphorical level. The literal Link is fine, however. The literal Link awakens from his metaphorical death and tries to catch the Skull Kid. The Skull Kid rides off with Epona, dragging Link through the woods in consequence. We take control over Link and chase the kid through the woods until we suddenly run into a seemingly endless abyss in the middle of a tree and fall down. After seeing a strange vision of tons of masks floating towards us, we land on top of a Deku leaf. Skull Kid right in front of us. Skull Kid informs us that he got rid of Epona, implying he killed her. A dreamlike sequence plays where we were chased by Dekus and then we awake again, transformed into a Deku ourselves. We try to chase the kid, but get stopped by Tattle. This causes her to become separated from her brother Tail, the other fairy. Tattle is now stuck with us. After a short platforming sequence, we make our way through a confusing upside-down corridor and enter Clock Town at its end. Here, we run into the Happy Mask Salesman, one of the most mysterious characters in the entire Zelda franchise. The first thing he says to us is the following: "You've been met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" So what is he talking about? Well, first and most obviously, it means that we got transformed into a Deku. Obviously. But I believe there are two additional layers to this sentence. Second, it plays with the metaphorical layer that Link died and is now being reborn in Termina over and over again. Cool, but what is the third potential meaning? Well, for this to make sense, we have to do the Hero of Time's signature move. We have to travel back in time. We have to travel back to the events of Ocarina of Time. Early in Ocarina of Time, Navi and Link make their way through the Lost Woods together. There, they run into the Skull Kid for the very first time. Here is what Navi thinks about the Skull Kid the first time she and Link encounter it. Is this what happens to children who wander into the forest? The implication here is that children that get lost in the Lost Woods transform into Skull Kids. And this is where things start to become interesting. See, we already chatted that Navi leaving Link at the end of Ocarina of Time symbolizes Link no longer needing a guide anymore. He grew up. The fact that Link is searching for Navi at the beginning of Majora's Mask implies that he's searching for guidance again. It symbolizes that he's a child again. Majora's Mask now starts with Link as a child lost in the forest. The exact thing that Navi believes is what turns someone into a Skull Kid. So we can not only think about the events of Majora's Mask as they take place in Termina, but we can also think about the story as what is happening in Link's unconsciousness, while in reality he's lying in the Lost Woods, slowly transforming into a Skull Kid, trying to fight it off. You know, we can think of Termina as a real place, but we can also think of Termina as a mix of different ideas that float around in Link's unconsciousness. Just to be clear here, I'm not saying that Majora's Mask is absolutely 100% totally taking place in Link's unconsciousness. There's way too little evidence provided in the game to come to this conclusion with any kind of certainty. But, as we'll hopefully soon discover, talking about Termina not only as it is represented, but also as a metaphor for Link's unconsciousness, makes a surprising amount of sense as well. So back to our buddy, the mask-selling and very happy mask salesman. The terrible fate that we've been met with could also refer to us slowly transforming into a Skull Kid. And with this, we've finally established all the necessary fluff to discuss the story on its different layers in detail going forward. Hooray! So let's talk about the land of Termina. On the 23rd of December 1849, just one day before Christmas, Fyodor Dostoevsky found himself standing in line on Semyonov Plaza in St. Petersburg, three of his friends tied to poles right in front of him. He was probably freezing in the cold Russian winter, wearing nothing but a white corpse smock and a corpse hood. He was waiting for his own execution. Months earlier, Tsar Nikolai had him arrested for reading banned revolutionary literature and for being part of Utopian Circle. When the judge pronounced the death sentence, Dostoevsky was just 28 years of age. So, here's where this gets interesting, because literally the second Dostoevsky and his friends were to be executed, suddenly a letter got read. A letter that had been signed over a month earlier. He and his friends were pardoned. That is, if being sentenced to several years of hard labor in Siberia in the 1850s is to be a pardon. The government had already known for weeks that they would pardon Dostoevsky and his friends, but they didn't tell them until the very last second. They even staged the entire execution, a form of psychological torture that the Russian government of this time liked to do every once in a while. So this story should go on to have a somewhat happy ending. Dostoevsky would live on for dozens and dozens of years, surviving Siberia and going on to become a novelist that is often regarded as one of the greatest novelists in the entirety of world literature. But that's not the reason why we're talking about Dostoevsky's staged execution. The reason we're talking about it is a different one. It is because in Majora's Mask, the land of Termina is eternally stuck in a situation comparable to Dostoevsky's. The people of Termina are all waiting for an execution that never comes. In Termina, the moon is about to fall onto the planet, destroying the entire land in the process. There are just 72 hours from the moment we arrive until all who live in this land are to die by the falling moon. And the closer this moment comes, the more aware its inhabitants become of this fact. On the final night, we can find inhabitants of Termina coping with the fact that they believe they're about to die everywhere. It's an incredibly brutal, sad and melancholic setting. The more we get to know the world, the more we learn about Termina's inhabitants, and the more we start to help them, the more this sadness builds up. It's one of Majora's Mask's greatest strengths. The game is the slow descent into melancholic sadness. The game permanently confronts us with the fact that nothing we do in this world is of permanence, be it either because the moon will erase all life, or be it because we reset the time loop. But for now, we have no idea about any of this. For now, we are nothing more than a Deku scrub that has absolutely no idea what is going on. During our first 3-day cycle, we are trapped in the Deku form and can't leave the town yet. The game masterfully uses this time to introduce Clocktown and all of its citizens. We had the Great Fairy. We play hide and seek with the Bombers, a secret kids club that tries to help the inhabitants of Termina. We learn that the Skull Kid is on top of the clock tower, probably summoning the moon. We trade a moon tear for access to a Deku flower, and finally, we make our way towards the top of the clock tower on the night of the final day. There we confront Skull Kid. Tale gives us hints on where to find help, in the swamp, the mountains, the ocean and the canyon, before Skull Kid brutally shuts her down. We shoot a bubble towards Skull Kid, which causes him to drop the ocarina. Once we pick up the ocarina, we suddenly remember our goodbye from Princess Zelda. She tells us that she'll never forget the days we spent together in Hyrule, one of the very few times Hyrule is mentioned in Majora's Mask, and that she believes in her heart that the day will come that we will meet again. We remember a song Zelda taught us, the Song of Time. Playing this song allows us to travel through time back to the very beginning of the 3-day cycle. There, we run run into the happy mask salesman again, who teaches us the Song of Healing. This song transforms us back into Link and gives us the Deku Scrub mask that allows us to transform into a Deku at will. Hooray! And with this, Majora's Mask intro finally comes to a stop, and the real game begins. Every 72 hours, the moon will crash into Termina and destroy all life. We can return to the beginning of this cycle by playing the Song of Time whenever we want, but all changes that we made to the world are then undone. So everything we do in Majora's Mask is on a timer and no change is permanent. Our main goal for now is to visit the 4 areas the fairy spoke about, to help the people there, to make it through the dungeons there, and to free the 4 giants that are trapped in the 4 areas. So let's do that. Let's quickly talk about the 4 main quests in Majora's Mask, and let's discuss the gameplay and the dungeon design while at it. The 4 main areas that we have to visit are in the 4 cardinal directions. Interestingly, the layout of Termina has a slight resemblance to a clock. Our first stop is the swamp area. Something is poisoning the waters in the swamp. One of the local witches got lost in the forest, the Deku princess is missing, and worst of all, the Deku King has imprisoned a monkey and plans to execute it because he falsely believes it is responsible for the princess' disappearance. We help the witch break into the Deku castle, learn a new song from the trapped monkey and head towards the first dungeon in the game, the Woodfall Temple. So, the Woodfall Temple. The Woodfall Temple is the first temple in the game, and it is also the first dungeon that we can change entirely by our actions. We can cure the water here, which makes it possible to swim in it. This change affects several rooms at once, which means it really challenges our understanding of the dungeon as a whole. That's a bit of a theme for Majora's Mask's dungeons, and it is one of the game's biggest strengths. The Snow Temple has us manipulate a huge pillar in its center by breaking out blocks as a Goron. The Water Temple has us manipulate the direction the water flows and guide electricity through the entire temple, and the Stone Tower Temple has us famously flip the entire dungeon on its head. The dungeons are generally a huge step up from Ocarina of Times. Some of them, like the Water Temple or the Stone Tower Temple, are, at least in my humble opinion, among the very best dungeons Nintendo ever created. Their challenging nature, combined with the many uses of the different masks and the great ways to permanently change some of the temple's features, just makes them really memorable experiences. And the Woodfall Temple already shows all those qualities as the very first dungeon. After defeating the boss here, we free the first giant. Those scenes are really interesting because the way they are presented isn't really celebrative in its tone but melancholic. It's almost a bit sad to encounter this guardian for the very first time. The giant teaches us the oath to order. Once we freed all 4 giants, we can use this song to call them to help save the land. The next giant is in the mountains in the north. So, Snowfall Mountain is plagued by a cold winter that refuses to end. We first make our way to the Goron village, where all the Gorons are in utter terror, because the Goron's eldest son refuses to stop crying. The eldest is the only one who knows the song that calms him, but he has gone missing. In another part of the city, we run into the owl, who guides us towards the Lens of Truth. The Lens of Truth allows us to climb this wall. Atop it, we find the grave of the Goron hero Darmani. If we play the Song of Healing here, we gain a Goron mask which transforms us into Darmani whenever we put it on. Quite literally. The other Gorons even mistake us for their long-fallen hero if we talk to them while wearing the mask. As a Goron, we gain hyper strength and the ability to roll, which is an incredibly cool form of movement. The Goron roll just has something hectic and uncontrollable to it. It almost feels as if someone forgot to downtune it a bit for the final release of the game. It's great. That's generally something Majora's Mask really excels at. It's a joy to move around transformed into a Goron, a Deku Scrub, or to swim as a Sora, which is really interesting. You know, most games struggle to make the movement of a single main character enjoyable for the entirety of a game, but Majora's Mask has 4 main characters that all control fundamentally different, yet all are a joy to use. So, how did they pull this off? Well, I believe it's because of a very simple trick. Every transformation is vastly superior to Link in one way or another. The Deku Scrub can jump over water and his spin is a bit faster than Link's roll. The Goron plays like a Formula 1 racer and the Sora has insanely high speed underwater and incredibly high mobility. They are all superior to Link one way or another, which means we are never sad when we transform into one of them for a section. Alright, we can help the Gorons with their screaming problem by unfreezing the eldest Goron, who is trapped in an ice block on the road towards the city. If we unfreeze him, he teaches us the first part of an old Goron lullaby that we can use to make the Goron kid fall asleep and to reach the next temple. The Snow Temple is even better than the Woodfall Temple before it. In the center of the dungeon is this huge tower-shaped room that we slowly have to climb upwards. Halfway through the dungeon, however, we activate a switch that raises a gigantic pillar upwards that messes with which paths we can take to the top. And yeah, it's great. At top we run into the second boss of the game. So let's quickly chat about them. There are 4 main bosses in the game. Odolwa in the Woodfall Temple, God in Snow Mountain, Giorok in the Great Bay Temple, and Twinmold in the Stone Tower Temple. And it pains me to say, but at least in the original version of the game, none of those boss fights are pretty good. Odolwa is the strangest of the bunch. In the N64 release of the game, it is incredibly unclear how to even defeat the boss. I usually just run around hitting him, defeating the ads, and after a while he just randomly dies. It's a really weird fight. Gold atop the Snow Temple is a lot better. We fight him as a Goron. We race him in rounds, trying to hit him until he falls down, which either allows us to get tons of hits in as a Goron or to transform back and to attack his head. It's my favorite fight in the original game. Racing against him as a Goron just has something really satisfying. Giorok, on the other hand, holy fuzzy Giorok. So, story time. I actually played Majora's Mask shortly after it was released. I must have been about 10 or maybe 11 years old back then. I remember that I made it up until the Water Temple as a kid, though I might have had some help from an adult. I honestly can't remember. What I do remember, however, is that my playthrough came to an abrupt end once I faced Giorok. My 10-year-old alter ego wasn't able to beat him before the time limit reset the dungeon. I remember trying it over and over, but I simply wasn't able to make it through the fight and eventually had to quit the game in pure frustration. Having just replayed the game as an adult, yeah, I see why I wasn't able to do this as a kid. The fight is really frustrating. The boss is quite difficult, but for all the completely wrong reasons. The main challenge here isn't shooting the boss. That's incredibly easy. It also isn't damaging Giorok. That's no problem either. The huge challenge in this fight is to swim out of the water fast enough as a Sora after we hit him. The real boss is this ledge. For whatever reason, it is really difficult to grab this ledge, but if Link decides no ledge grabbing today, the boss swallows us as a whole immediately afterwards, and we take a ton of damage. So yeah, it's my least favorite boss in the game by far, as it actively destroyed my entire childhood. Which brings us to Twinmold, the 4th and final main boss in the game. I'm torn on this fight. So mechanically, it is a train wreck, but to be completely honest, most fights in Majora's Mask are train wreck by today's standard. The thing that makes Majora's Mask so interesting to play in 2023 are its themes, the atmosphere, and the great story. The combat system certainly is not. Mechanically, the fight manages to somehow walk the thin line of it being almost impossible to hit Twinmold, while somehow at the same time being an incredibly and way too easy encounter. But on the other hand, fighting in this gigantic empty desert among those ruins, using a giant's mask to grow huge and dueling both dragons at the same time, it's thematically the perfect fit for the Stone Tower Temple. So overall, I'm a Twinmold fan, even though the fight itself is disappointing. That leaves us with 3 bosses that are mechanically disappointing and 1 boss that is decent. And that is kind of a problem for a game like Majora's Mask. See, if we're going for 100% completion, then we're very likely to do most of those bosses twice or even 3 or 4 times. Beating those bosses is what causes the changes to the overworld. Beating Odolwa, for example, cures the swamp from the poison, which opens up lots of side content. If we do not complete all the side content the first time we defeat the boss, which is not going to happen on a blind playthrough, then we have to defeat it again every time we want to do something that is gated behind the swamp being cured. So the fact that the bosses range from mediocre to really frustrating causes a problem in the game, since we are likely to fight them several times. Hu and Ray. Our next stop are the Zoras of the Great Bay, the worst area in the original game from a gameplay perspective. At least in my opinion. But before we discuss everyone's favorite sea folk, let's do a quick interlude. Let's chat about something else. Let's talk about the PlayStation 2. On the 26th of October 2000, Sony released the PlayStation 2 in North America. To the surprise of pretty much everyone, Sony released a successor to the original PlayStation as the market leader in the home console market. The PlayStation 1 did the impossible. The original PlayStation had outsold the Nintendo 64, a success that barely anyone would have thought possible just 5 years prior. Nintendo had single-handedly revitalized the home console market after the great video game crash of the 80s. The NES was the almost unchallenged market leader. Nintendo also won the second generation of home consoles. Sega put up a good fight, but in the end Nintendo clearly stayed on top. So when the third generation of home consoles rolled around, Nintendo was positioned to win. Nintendo had established years of trust with consumers over the past decade. They were the clear market leader. They owned many of the biggest franchises in gaming at the time. They already had a huge lead over Sega, and their only other competitor was Sony, a no-name in the home console market. They completely dominated the handheld market, and they had the console generation defining title in the pipeline, Ocarina of Time, a game that critics would almost universally call the best game created up until then, once it finally released. Nintendo was perfectly positioned to take home the third generation of home consoles. It seemed unthinkable that someone would overtake Nintendo this generation, given the lead that they had built up. 5 years later, the PlayStation had outsold the Nintendo 64 3-1. Sony surprised everyone and not only beat Nintendo, but devastated them. The Nintendo 64 ended up selling about 33 million copies. The PS1 sold over 100 million. So how did Sony manage the impossible? Well, there were many things that gave Sony an edge over the N64. The first one is that Sony used the back then revolutionary technology of CD-ROMs for their games. So for the younger generation, CD-ROMs are like magical round mirrors that were able to store insane amounts of data, like 600 megabytes at once. The other big edge that Sony had over the N64 was that the console launched over a year earlier and was able to gain a head start because of this. Which brings us to the 26th of October 2000, the day the PlayStation 2 launched, because Sony was trying to pull the exact same trick on Nintendo once again. The PlayStation 2 launched a year before the GameCube. So why am I telling this tale in a video about Majora's Mask, one might ask? Well, here's the plot twist. Not only the PlayStation 2 released on the 26th of October 2000 in North America, Majora's Mask did too. Majora's Mask literally released in the States the same day the PlayStation 2 did. And this little fact tells us a lot about how stressful the development of Majora's Mask must have been. Ocarina of Time was released in Japan late in 1998. Majora's Mask had an early 2000 release in Japan. Majora's Mask was made in only a little more than a year. Ocarina of Time got delayed several times until Nintendo was truly happy with the game. For Majora's Mask, that simply wasn't an option. There wasn't room to delay the game. It had to make a 2000 release, or the sequel to the most critically acclaimed game of all time would release straight into the GameCube's marketing campaign. So I can only imagine the pressure that the Zelda team probably had been under. Not only are they making a sequel to the then best game of all time, they also had to do so in about a year, with a hard deadline ahead, because the N64 was at the end of its life cycle. And what did the team decide to do? They decided to go with a completely new and unique concept. They decided to go into insane thematic depth and to tell a complicated, multi-layered narrative about healing grief and suffering. They decided to create 3 additional forms of movement for Link. They decided to build a Zelda game with the most substantial side content up until this day. They decided to have the game take place in a 3-day Groundhog Day setting, and they decided to not even have the game take place in Hyrule or the final bad guy be Ganondorf. Whenever I think about how Majora's Mask came to be, it just completely blows my mind. Deciding to develop a game like Majora's Mask under the circumstances that the Zelda team faced back then, it's just utter insanity. And they pulled it off. While the game is far from flawless, there are many things that Majora's Mask does miles better than any other game in the series. I cannot imagine the level of self-esteem necessary to even attempt something like this. But holy fuzzy, am I glad that they tried. And with this, let's return to our summary of the main story and our quick little gameplay discussion. Our next stop on our journey to save Termina is the Great Bay, my least favorite area in the game. So what's the problem with the Great Bay area? Well, it's certainly not the area itself. The area is fantastic. Everything here drips sadness out of every inch. It is an incredibly melancholic and interesting area. That's not the problem. Neither is the Sora transformation the problem. Swimming as a Sora through the sea for the very first time is actually one of the highlights of the game. The problem is the egg quest. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Once we arrive at the Great Bay, something really unusual happens. We see a Sora float unconsciously underwater. Once we bring him back to safety, we witness one of the weirdest death scenes I've ever seen. In all of fiction, not just in games. He starts to sing us a song, and then he dies right in front of us. The song sounds like this. Just for anyone who never played Majora's Mask, I swear I'm not making this up, this is in the game.
Baby! Oh!
He sings about how the singer of his band laid strange eggs and how he certainly won't die in peace, baby. I love it. If we play the Song of Healing here, we get the Sora mask. And thus, the egg quest begins. The eggs that Lulu, the lead singer of the Sora band, the Indigogos, laid were stolen by pirates. 4 of them are hidden in a pirate fortress in which we have to sneak into. 3 are hidden in an eel-infested area called the Pinnacle Rock. And funnily enough, both areas are great. The Pirate Fortress is a long, non-linear stealth dungeon with some puzzle solving in between and is a great change of pace. And the Pinnacle Rock area is one of the strangest and most magical areas in the game. It has this really unique atmosphere to it. We have to recover all the 7 eggs and we have to put them into this container in the research laboratory to learn a song that allows us to reach the water dungeon by summoning a turtle. So far so good. The huge problem, we need to put the Sora eggs into a bottle in order to transport them. In the original version of the game, it is highly unlikely that players have 4 bottles at this point on a blind playthrough. It is possible to have 4 bottles, but it is highly unlikely. But if we only have, say, 2 bottles at this point, then this side quest becomes insanely tedious. Because if we only have 2 bottles, we have to play the entire Pirate Fortress twice in a row. We can't grab all the eggs in one sitting. Even worse, we also have to travel to the Pinnacle Rock twice. This introduces an insane amount of backtracking into a game that is on a timer. If we happen to take especially long in the Pirate Fortress, something I remember happening to me as a kid, then we're forced to travel back in time, which also puts all the eggs back into the fortress and the eel-infested waters, which is super duper frustrating and the big problem with this area. Luckily, the Great Bay Temple is great. The Great Bay Temple is one of my favorite temples in the entire franchise. Flat out. It's such an interesting concept and it is executed in such a brilliant way. I love it. The dungeon is built around 2 main gimmicks. The first one is this large room with a strong current that allows us to only flow into certain entrances depending on the rotation of the current. The other gimmick are several large wires that lead through the temple and that carry an electrical signal, but that are blocked at several parts by a switch, which means that we have to figure out why the electricity doesn't leave a certain room it enters and then flip the switch. Those 2 gimmicks turn the dungeon into a huge puzzle box where rooms are relevant long after we first left them and where we are forced to understand how everything fits together while exploring the dungeon. It's really challenging, but in a good way, and once all the pieces fall together, it is incredibly satisfying. The Water Temple is unironically one of my favorite dungeons that Nintendo ever crafted for any Zelda game. It is truly worthy of a spot in the Zelda Hall of Fame. After murdering Gearrock here, our next stop is the Ikana Valley, my favorite area in the game. The war between the Ikana Kingdom and another faction called the Garos devastated the valley. Almost everyone living here died during this fighting, but not even the death of most of its inhabitants brought the canyon peace. The land is cursed. The Ikana and the Garo continue to fight even in death. The Ikana Canyon features the most content before we finally reach the dungeon. First, we have to defeat the captain of the Ikana Guard, which rewards us with a mask and allows us to command the dead in the graveyard to open up the graves. In one of those graves, we find an angry composer who was tricked by his brother and is still full of anger towards him, who teaches us the Song of Storms. We settle the dispute between the brothers by playing this song to the other brother, which returns the water to the valley. Next, we help a little girl save her father. Her father is slowly transforming into a Gypto. Gyptos are basically zombies in the Zelda universe. Because of her father's slow zombification, she was forced to lock him up in a closet. Once the water flows through the canyon again, the mill is restored, which causes the house to play this tune. The music causes the Gyptos that roam around the house to dance, which in consequence causes the earth to swallow them. We'll try to make sense of this weird little dancing to death scene in a second. Also, if you think I'm reaching with my "they're dancing here" interpretation, fine, I might be, but it certainly isn't the only instance of dancing zombies in the game. After saving the father and reuniting him with his girl, we're rewarded with the Gypto mask. With this mask, we can solve a long trading sequence in the well under Ikana that ultimately rewards us with the mirror shield. The mirror shield has a really interesting design. The second we pick up the mirror shield, this incredibly sad and shocked face stares directly at us for the rest of the entire game. With the mirror shield we can enter Icana Castle, a really interesting mini dungeon that ends with us confronting the undead king of Icana. We fight him in a boss battle and afterwards he says a couple of words that I believe are at the center of Majora's Mask themes. He says, believing in your friends and embracing that belief by forgiving failure. Those feelings have vanished from our hearts, implying that this is what caused the curse that plagues those lands. And then he teaches us the effigy of emptiness, a song that allows us to create an empty copy of ourselves. The Swiss-American psychiatrist Elisabeth Kübler-Ross is famous for defining the 5 stages of grief in her book On Death and Dying. According to her, people who realize that they are about to die go through 5 stages of grief in a certain order, namely denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and lastly acceptance. So scientifically speaking, this model is far from undisputed, but it managed to make it into the mainstream and is certainly not completely wrong. So here's why I'm bringing this up. There's a popular fan theory out there that the 4 main areas and Clocktown are modeled after the Kübler-Ross stages of grief. According to the theory, Clocktown represents denial. You know, the townspeople are in denial that the moon is about to crash down. The swamp represents anger. The Deku King, who is angry at the monkey for irrational reasons. The Snowhead Mountain represents bargaining, namely the Armani, who begs us to bring him back to life with our magic. The Great Bay represents depression, with its general oppressive atmosphere, and Lulu, the Sora girl, who lost her voice and isn't speaking anymore. And finally, the Icana Valley represents acceptance, with the 2 brothers settling their dispute and the king accepting what has happened to the valley. And at least in my humble opinion, I think the theory is correct. Maybe. It certainly kind of fits. I don't think the 5 stages of grief were the main inspiration for the areas, more on this in a second, but I buy the idea that they had the 5 stages of grief in their mind when they were designing the main areas. Here's the thing, however, I don't believe it's the only time when they modeled something around the stages of grief, because at least in my reading, the entirety of the Icana Valley plot loosely follows the stages of grief as well. The first thing we have to do here is to command skeletons that are still acting as if they were alive to open graves. Once they open the graves, they literally jump inside of them. I believe this represents denial that they died, and Link having them open and entering the graves symbolizes them overcoming their denial. The next stage would be anger, and the next thing we have to do is to settle the dispute between the composing brothers by playing the Song of Storms. We're literally told that the thunder in the song is the brothers' anger. Playing the song settles the dispute and moves us into the next stage, bargaining. And would you believe it, the next thing we do is to literally bargain with the dead to reach the mirror shield. The mirror shield is the one that fits the least, but I believe the mirror shield represents depression itself. You know, it reflects light, and it would also explain why it is designed the way it is. Finally, we reach the stage of acceptance, when we defeat the king of Icana Castle and hear him speak about forgiveness. So here's the thing with Majora's Mask. I have absolutely no idea if the team planned this or if I'm simply reading way too much into it. Majora's Mask is so incredibly full of symbolism and takes place on so many layers at once that I just have no idea what they were actually planning and what is me going full-blown cray-cray tinfoil mode. If I'm correct and the Icana Valley up until this point symbolized Link going through the 5 stages of grief, however, well, then the implications of this are rather interesting, because we aren't done with the Icana Valley yet. There's one more area that we have to visit here, an area that we symbolically only visit after we came to accept our own grief, my favorite area in the entire game, and the only area in Termina where we can find the Triforce. The Old Testament tells the story of the people of Shinnor, people who arrived in those lands as a united race. There, they built a city, and in the middle of the city, they began building a tower so high that its top would have reached into heaven itself. The Tower of Babel. God saw the tale, saw the people building the tower, a tower that was meant to reach into her realm. To stop the mortals from building a tower up into the heavens, she confounded the languages of the people building it, so that they were no longer able to communicate with each other, which made completing the tower impossible. So, if we take this story at face value, then it is the explanation the Old Testament gives us for why people speak different languages. But there's obviously a second layer to this little tale. It's a tale about hubris and arrogance. It's a tale about humanity arrogantly trying to reach the heavenly realms by earthly means. Thieves. It's a parable about how humans should not attempt to put themselves on the same level as God. So what has all of this to do with Majora's Mask's Stone Tower? Well, two things. First, Majora's Mask's Stone Tower has some obvious parallels to the story of the Tower of Babel. The Stone Tower is quite literally a human-made tower that stretches into the clouds. But second, there's a strong theme of blasphemy going on in this area. This area has a theme of humans putting themselves above God, which brings us to the Triforce. See, the only place in which the Triforce can be found in Termina are on the path to the Stone Tower and in the Stone Tower itself. But it's not the fact that we find the Triforce here that is so fascinating. The fascinating thing is where we find it. There are several stone switches on the ground that move blocks around. We have to play the Elegy of Emptiness to lock the stones in place and build a bridge towards the dungeon. So far so good. Here's the thing, however. Those blocks aren't merely blocks with faces. If we take a closer look at them, then we can see that they are clearly shaped like cowering humans. And if we take a look at the bottom of those blocks, then we can find the Triforce on them, directly above the butt cheeks, on the spot where the genitals would be. To make matters even worse, the creatures lick the poor Triforce. Whoever created those certainly wasn't a huge fan of either the goddess, the royal family of Hyrule, or Zelda. So if you think this is kind of out of place for a Zelda game, don't worry, Nintendo felt the same way because this Triforce is mysteriously missing in 3DS remake. Anyway, that's not the final thing that is interesting here. See, if we take a closer look at the dungeon entrance, then we can see that the entrance has actually Majora's Mask drawn on top of it. It's just upside down. If we enter the Stone Tower dungeon, there is another broken statue of the mask upside down in front of us. Then, there is this hand placed atop the tower, a hand that shows a burning finger towards the sky, another symbol that seems to mock the goddess. Finally, there are 4 phallic-shaped pillars standing around the entrance to the temple atop the Stone Tower. Those likely represent the 4 giants. All of those symbols are either symbols of blasphemy or upside-down symbols of Majora's Mask. The gameplay gimmick of the Stone Tower dungeon is to turn the entire tower on its head. The way we flip the tower is by using light arrows. Finally, we also find the giant's mask in this temple, the mask that transforms Link into a literal giant. What do we make out of all of this? Well, there's a popular fan theory that tries to make sense of it. The idea is roughly the following. A long time ago, the people of Termina used to worship the goddess of time, but then they decided to change their beliefs for some reason. They chose to worship the 4 giants instead. They built the Stone Tower as a mockery of the old goddess, a tower that was supposed to contain a portal towards her heavenly realm. They put up phallus-shaped statues of their new gods, the giants, to mock the goddess. They hid the giant's mask in the temple to worship their new gods, and they put the Triforce onto those blocks as additional mockery. But then, the goddess found out what they were doing. As a punishment, she flipped the tower upside down. Instead of linking to the heavens, the portal now linked, metaphorically, to hell. We actually go through this portal while the tower is flipped. It links to the desert where we fight against Twin Mold. The idea is that Majora was originally imprisoned in this desert. Majora arrived in Termina because the people mocked the goddess, who in turn punished them. And personally, I love this theory. I believe that is pretty much exactly what happened. There is just one thing which I personally see different, the role of the giants, but to understand all of this we first have to make another quick detour and have to have a chat about the origins of the giants. Long before the events of Majora's Mask, the Skull Kid and the 4 giants were actually friends. But then, the giants told the people of Termina on the day of the Carnival of Time that they would guard the land from now on, while lying dormant. Each giant walked 100 steps into one of the 4 directions we find them in and went to rest there. If the people of Termina were ever in need, they could call the giants for help, which left the Skull Kid behind alone. The Skull Kid stricken by the giant's departure. It felt neglected and alone, and so anger arose in it. It started to spread its anger all throughout Termina. After a while, the people of Termina were fed up with the kid's mischief and called the sleeping giants for help, and the giants answered. They ordered Skull Kid to leave Termina, threatening to kill him if he disobeyed. And so the Skull Kid left Termina. His former friends banished him. Awesome. So with this we've established almost everything that we need to understand what I believe to be the small misconception in the Stone Tower theory. But before we return to our 4 phallus-shaped pillars, we first need to make another detour. We first have to talk about Majora's Mask's side quests. Momo is a youth novel written by Michael Ende that was released in 1973. The book is about a young girl, fittingly called Momo, who discovers a terrible secret. One day, employees of the time savings bank appear in her little town and start to convince the adults to save their precious time at their bank, where they promise to pay them good interest. They promise us that if we were to give up our time now, we may enjoy a magnitude of more time at some point in the future. And the adults all start to save their time. Slowly, the lovely town Momo lives in changes. It transforms into a cold and hectic place. Until one day, Momo discovers the terrifying truth. The time savings bank isn't taking care of the adults' time. It's a fraud. As a matter of fact, the people are cheated out of their saved time. The employees of the bank smoke up the saved time in cigars to stay alive by burning through other people's lifetime. Luckily, Momo and her friends manage to bring this fraudulent business model to a fall after living through a lot of adventures. The end. So what does Michael Ende's Momo have to do with Majora's Mask? Well, nothing on the surface, except that both are loosely interested in exploring the concept of time. What they do have in common, however, is the way they present their ideas. We previously discussed that Majora's Mask plot takes place on several layers. One is the literal plot that is going on. The other one is what the game actually wants to say with this plot. The same is true for Momo, kind of obviously. On the surface, Momo is about a young girl defeating a criminal enterprise. But what the book really wants to comment on is how we decide to spend our precious time on Earth, how we often aren't living for the moment, and how we often fail to even ask for whom we're doing what we do and who truly benefits from the work we do. The entire plot of Momo is a metaphor for something else, which brings us to Majora's Mask, because pretty much everything in Majora's Mask is an allegory for something else too. Which brings us to Majora's Mask's side quests. On the Romani Ranch, there is a man farming chicken called Grok, full of sorrow. He understands that the moon is about to crash into Termina, and he has kind of accepted that, but he's heartbroken nonetheless, because he won't get to see his hatchlings grow up into adult chickens. If we wear the Bremen mask, we can march with the chicks until they grow up, which makes Grok all happy and chuckle. He got to see his chicken grow up after all. In the game, that is a really strange side quest, but if we think about it for a second, we can see that the whole thing is a metaphor for something else. Grok's story isn't about a man who never gets to see his chicks grow up, it's about a father who never gets to see his children grow up. We help him come to terms with this. The Gorman brother that is devastated that he won't get to perform at the night of the carnival and who is found drinking milk at the bar is meant to symbolize someone who succumbs to alcoholism because his creative dreams stay unfulfilled. The Anshu quest is meant to represent true love that never comes to be because of circumstance. When we race with the Deku Butler, we aren't doing a fun racing minigame. Metaphorically, we are helping a father heal after the death of his son. Then there is the father that slowly transforms into a zombie in a wardrobe, whilst zombies are circling around the house. I believe this quest represents becoming estranged from your own child because of the responsibilities of adult life. It's the responsibilities of adult life that are slowly turning him into a zombie that his own child is barely able to recognize anymore. The reason why I believe this to be the case is because the way we get rid of the zombies around the house is by getting them to dance to a child tune. I think metaphorically we reconnect those zombies with their childhood by making them dance, an action that has no purpose other than being enjoyable in and of itself. Then there is Lulu, the Sora girl who literally lost her unborn children and can't speak anymore. You know, it's a bit heavy, but I believe it is a metaphor for a miscarriage. She, literally lost her unborn children. Finally, there is the ranch side quest. Okay, so here's what I believe to be the symbolism of the alien attacks. Romani tells us that every year on the forenight of the carnival, aliens come and abduct the cows. The adults won't believe her, but she's training so that she's able to fight them off this time. And would you believe it? The aliens actually appear and try to steal the cows. If we fight them off, Romani later reveals to us that she did not tell her sister about the aliens, so as not to worry her, and asks us if we want to stay on the farm and want to sleep in her bed instead of her, which would make her sister happy too. If we don't fight off the aliens, Romani is abducted alongside the cows, and we find her traumatized the next morning. So we have aliens abducting a child at night, the kid not being able to talk about it with adults as they wouldn't believe her, the kid hoping that a hero comes and sleeps in her bed, the sister apparently also being in need of a hero, and the kid being traumatized if help doesn't come at night. So yeah, At least in my reading, the whole thing is a metaphor for child abuse. It's not even that subtle. Just to be clear here, you may disagree with my interpretations of the symbolic meaning of all of those quests, and that's completely fine, you know? I don't think there is such a thing as a definitive answer to what all those quests represent. I believe Nintendo purposefully made all of them very abstract, with a wide variety of possible interpretations. The thing that I want to establish isn't that my understanding of those quests is 100% the correct way to read their symbolism. What I want to establish is that all of Majora's Mask's side quests represent one form of the purest and most painful traumas that human beings can potentially go through. Majora's Mask side quests are a terrifying medley of the most serious forms of human suffering. Those side quests fulfill a narrative function. They are a plot device for Link's own story in Majora's Mask. On a metaphorical level, Link encounters all sorts of people who all go through an insane trauma. Those are the side quests. The main quest is about Link's own trauma. So to understand the symbolism of the main story, we first have to understand Link. At the beginning of Majora's Mask, Link is very likely in emotional pain. He saved the Kingdom of Hyrule as an adult and got sent back in time by Zelda, but that victory came at a cost. The Link we see at the beginning of Majora's Mask just suffered through the events of Ocarina of Time, an incredibly difficult journey that Link innocently got caught in by circumstance and by no wrongdoing of his own. The Link we see at the beginning has lost his childhood. He was literally forced to grow up in Ocarina of Time. The Link we see at the beginning has lost his strength and his status as a hero. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Link is sent back in time, so no one in Hyrule knows about his heroic deeds, since he did them in an alternative future. Additionally, the strength he acquired in adult form is taken away from him again. Finally, the Link that we see at the beginning has lost his home, Hyrule. In the Hyrule Historia, that goes in depth on the Zelda lore and was released together with Skyward Sword, we learn a bit more about the Hero of Time. So I'm paraphrasing here, but what the book states is basically that Zelda sent Link away from Hyrule after the events of Ocarina of Time to make sure that the Gate of Time can never be opened again. If we take this additional piece of lore that the Hyrule Historia provides into consideration, then Link suffers through a fourth trauma at the beginning of Majora's Mask. He was banished from his homeland of Hyrule. Alright, so with all of this fluff firmly established, let's take a look at the four main areas in the game, and let's try to figure out if they are metaphors for something else. In the first area, the swamp, an innocent creature of the forest is punished because it tried to help a princess. The monkey is punished for the disappearance of the Deku princess, even though the monkey actually tried to save the princess. You know, I think the plot in the swamp has a pretty strong symbolic resemblance to Link's story in Ocarina of Time. Metaphorically, the monkey is Link. Link is an innocent creature of the forest. The princess is Zelda, so the monkey that is punished for trying to save the princess actually represents Link, who is punished for trying to save Zelda. To add to this, the monkey is a hero that no one but the princess recognizes for one. Another thing that happens to Link. At the end of the swamp area, the princess confronts her father, the monkey is released, and the Deku realize that the monkey is actually a hero. I believe the swamp area represents Link coming to terms with the trauma that he must have suffered through after being torn into the events of Ocarina of Time by circumstance. Next, we head to the Goron area. The Goron main plot is about two things. On the one side, it is about a strong and mighty hero that died earlier than he had hoped to. I believe this represents Link coping with losing his strength when Zelda sent him back in time. The other plot revolves around a child that literally can't stop crying. In my understanding of the story, this child represents Link in its current form, crying for his former strength. You know, the strong adult is dead while the child can't stop crying. It parallels what is happening to Link. At the end of the Goron quest, the child is finally able to sleep again, symbolizing that Link came to terms with this aspect of his trauma. Next, we visit the Great Bay area. This area is about Gerudo pirates stealing unborn children. Ganondorf himself is the king of the Gerudo in Ocarina of Time. Because of this, I believe the Gerudo pirates symbolize, well, Ganondorf, obviously. The plot in the ocean area is metaphorically about Ganondorf stealing children, which would be a metaphor for Link losing his childhood because of the events of Ocarina of Time. At the end, Link saves the stolen children from the pirates and enables them to have a childhood. Quite literally, he causes them to be born. I believe this symbolizes Link coming to terms with his third trauma. Next is the Ikana Canyon. And this is where things become really interesting. So we already established that Link goes through the 5 stages of grief here. When Link arrives at the Stone Tower Temple, he symbolically has reached acceptance of what has happened to him. Now Link is able to confront the most severe trauma of all that he faced. The trauma that caused Majora to be released into the world. His trauma of being sent away from Hyrule. His his trauma of Princess Zelda banishing him to make sure Hyrule is safe, the trauma that the Stone Tower represents. So most of you probably already know where we are heading, but there is still one final thing that we have to establish beforehand. We have to do a quick chat about Skull Kid. Skull Kid isn't the villain in Majora's Mask. The mask is. At some point, after being sent away by his friends the Giant, the Skull Kid steals Majora's mask from the happy salesman. This mask corrupts him. It is the mask that does the evil things, not the kid themselves. In the literal interpretation of the plot, the Skull Kid is a vessel for something truly evil. That is what is going on the literal layer of the story. But what does the Skull Kid represent on the symbolic and metaphorical layer of the story? Well, that's where things get really interesting, because metaphorically, the Skull Kid is Link. Think about the following. The story of Link at the beginning of Majora's Mask is the story of a boy who lost his friend and got sent away by Zelda, a godlike deity that is guarding his homeland. Navi left Link and Zelda sent him away from Hyrule in order to protect its people. The story of the Skull Kid is the story of a child being first left behind by its friends, who became guardian deities for the people of Termina and later sent the kid away. The Giants left Skull Kid and later sent him away from Termina in an effort to protect the land. Skull Kid's story mirrors Link's story. As I understand the story, Skull Kid is a symbolic representation of Link's self, a side that is corrupted by Majora. Majora being Link's dark side that was able to take over because of the pain and the many traumas that the events of Ocarina of Time caused. The mask is also literally shaped like a corrupted heart. The first three areas represented Link coming to terms with most of those traumas. The Ikana Canyon symbolizes Link going through the stages of grief and coming to accept what happened to him. And the Stone Tower Temple now represents Link confronting his final and most hurtful trauma, that he was banished from his homeland. He confronts the place where Majora originated from. One way to read the story is that Majora got released when Link turned his back to the goddess of time, the royal family and Zelda. That's what the Stone Tower represents metaphorically. And with this we can finally answer the question which part of the popular fan theory I see a bit differently. See, the idea in the theory is it that the people of Termina had forsaken the goddess of time and chose to worship the giants instead. I believe this to be different. As I understand the story, the opposite is the case. The people of Termina had forsaken the giants. If we look back at the parallels between the stories of Link and the story of Skull Kid, then we can see that the giants in Skull Kid's story are a stand-in for Zelda or the goddess in Link's story. So if the tower represents Link's disillusionment with the goddess in a symbolic reading, the parallel in a literal reading of the story would be that the people of Termina became disillusioned with the giants, which is what certainly happened to the Skull Kid. If this is what happened, then this would explain a couple of things. The first one are the four phallic pillars. The theories that I'm familiar with interpret those four pillars as a mockery towards the goddess, and that's something that never quite made sense to me. You know, the four pillars are the four giants depicted in a phallic way. Depictions of a clerical symbol in a phallic way usually isn't done to mock other beliefs, it's done to mock one's own. The designer Tom Ford managed to produce quite an outrage because he sold crosses that looked like this. You'll never guess who was outraged because of those symbols. I'll give you a small hint, it wasn't the Buddhists. I believe those four pillars are a mockery of the giants. The other thing that this would explain are the two items that Link finds in the dungeon. In the Stone Tower Temple, Link finds two items. First, the light arrows. So, to understand the meaning of the light arrows, we once again have to go back to Ocarina of Time. In Ocarina of Time, the light arrows are the very last item that Link acquires. They are handed to him by Zelda herself. In my reading, Link taking the light arrows in the Stone Tower Temple represents him forgiving Zelda. You know, he reclaims a gift she once gave him. He once again becomes a warrior fighting for the light in Zelda. The second thing that is hidden in the temple is the Giant's Mask, which I believe represents the same thing towards the giants. It represents Link becoming a giant himself, another form of a warrior for good. This time in the symbolism of Termina instead of the symbolism of Hyrule. Awesome. So at this point in the story, Link went symbolically through the stages of grief. He reached acceptance about what happened to him, he confronted all his main traumas and forgave them, and he even visited the place that Majora originated from and managed to forgive Zelda there. At the same time, we now have freed all the giants. If we now confront Skull Kid atop the tower during the final night, then we can play the O2 order to summon them. The giants appear and stop the moon from falling. But, as it turns out, the giants aren't strong enough to stop the catastrophe once and for all. If we really want to stop the moon from crashing into Termina, we have to enter the moon ourselves. In Ocarina of Time, the Water Temple is found in the middle of Lake Hylia. In the middle of this temple, one of the most interesting events of the game takes place. Link walks through a seemingly normal door and suddenly finds himself in a room whose existence is physically impossible in this space. The water on the ground shows Link's reflection. The room is entirely empty, but for the tree in its center. And then one of the most memorable combat encounters in the history of the Zelda series happens. Link is attacked by a shadow version of himself. He's literally attacked by his own dark self. If we want to understand what exactly is going on here, we have to press the pause button for a second and rewind to the beginning of Ocarina of Time. At the beginning of Ocarina of Time, Link is a child. We first make it through the Deku Temple, then through the Fire Temple, next through the Water Temple, and then we pull out the Master Sword in the Temple of Time. This transforms child Link into an adult and releases Ganondorf into the world. So, at this point of the story, we are still child Link, but we are in the body of an adult. You know, Link did not really grow up, his child self just got magically transformed into an adult. He's a child in an adult body. And now, Ocarina of Time does something very interesting. We now play through another forest temple, through another fire temple, and finally through another water temple. And in this water temple, we suddenly fight against a shadow version of ourselves in front of a tree. So this tree here is quite important, because this tree is a Bodhi tree, a Buddhist symbol of awakening and enlightenment. Which brings us to the part of the video we've all been desperately waiting for. The digression into esoteric Buddhism. Okay, so a disclaimer, there are tons of different schools of Buddhism out there, and I'm by no means qualified to say anything of value about Buddhist symbolism in Majora's Mask outside of the very basics. So I'll keep this very basic. If someone is interested in a deeper dive to the Buddhist lore behind Majora's Mask, I left a great video by Max Darrett in the description that I wholeheartedly can recommend. Okay, so Pure Land Buddhism, the most prevalent form of Buddhism in Japan. One of the core beliefs of Buddhism is that all life is suffering, and we're endlessly reborn into this suffering. If we do good deeds while living, we acquire karma. If we acquire a lot of karma, we will be reborn in a better realm of suffering in our next reincarnation. You know, it's still suffering, but it is better suffering. And then there is enlightenment. Enlightenment, or nirvana, is reached if people manage to escape the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth by following the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha was the first person to reach enlightenment, and he did so under a tree. A Bodhi tree, to be precise. Because of this, the Bodhi tree is a symbolism for enlightenment or spiritual adulthood. The tree in the Water Temple is a Bodhi tree. It is a symbol for spiritually growing up and for reaching enlightenment. Symbolically, Link is facing his own dark side here under a Bodhi tree. He's fighting against his dark self in a literal reflection room. Defeating Dark Link here symbolizes Link reaching spiritual adulthood, symbolizes Link becoming enlightened. When Link pulled the Master Sword out at the Temple of Time, his body became an adult, but his mind stayed a child. Link's mind only reaches adulthood when he literally conquers his own dark reflection in a water temple under a Bodhi tree. Awesome. So why are we waffling about Link becoming enlightened by defeating his own dark self on a Bodhi tree in Ocarina of Time, one might ask? Well, because of the inside of the moon. See, we follow Skull Kid into the inside of the moon, and suddenly we find ourselves in this landscape. Everything is calm. We stand in grass, and in front of us is a giant tree with 5 children playing around it. This tree is another Bodhi tree. The inside of the moon mirrors the setting of the Water Temple. Below this tree, we can initiate the final fight against Majora. The final fight against Majora mirrors Link defeating Dark Link in Ocarina of Time. In order to become enlightened, Link must confront and conquer his own mind. Majora is symbolic of the darkness inside of himself. When Link enters the moon, he symbolically enters his own mind to confront the darkness within himself. Here's a fun thing to think about. If the moon represents Link's own mind, then it suddenly makes a lot of sense that the moon has a face in the game, doesn't it? Because behind the static grim of the moon, Link's consciousness is metaphorically hidden. Here's another thing that is fun to think about. If the moon represents Link's mind, then the moon crashing into Termina might be a metaphor for Link slowly losing his mind, you know? The mind crashing into Earth, destroying everything in the process, sounds like a symbolic representation for going insane to me, which would perfectly fit fit with the idea that Link might be lying in the Lost Woods, slowly transforming into a skull kid. But that's just a side note. Back to esoteric Buddhism with us. In Ocarina of Time, there is a little shop in the middle of Hyrule City's market. This shop is run by the Happy Mask salesman. The first time we speak with him, he says the following: "Welcome to the Happy Mask shop. We deal in masks that bring happiness to everyone. How would you like to be a happiness salesman? I lend you a mask, you sell the mask, and bring the money back here. If you want to read the fine print, take a look at the sign over there. After you sold all the masks, you will become happy yourself. Have faith." This final sentence here is what I believe to be one of the main motifs in Majora's Mask. After you sold all the masks, you will become happy yourself. Have faith. Crimea, Ramona's sister, speaks another really core sentence on the Ramoni Ranch. With every good deed, a child takes one step closer to adulthood. I believe those two sentences are at the center of Majora's Mask's narrative. It's taking a while, but now we've finally established every piece of the puzzle that we need to make sense of Majora's Mask's weirdness. So let's finally try to piece this together. Let's try to figure out what Majora's Mask is all about. At the center of the narrative is Link's trauma after the events of Ocarina of Time. Every area in the game represents one specific trauma. In the actual order, Link went through them. At first, he was innocently punished by trying to protect Zelda. Then after defeating Ganondorf, he lost his newfound power and his status as a hero by being sent back in time. Then he realizes that the fight against Ganon had cost him his childhood, he isn't a normal happy boy anymore. Finally, Zelda sent him away from Hyrule, which breaks the camel's neck and releases Majora into the world. Majora is a symbol for the dark side of Link, much like Dark Link in Ocarina of Time. Those traumas are all present in him when he enters the woods in search of Navi. He falls off his horse, which symbolizes him dying for the first time. I believe the game now plays out in some magical, unexplainable form of Link's unconsciousness. The real hero of time is probably lying in the woods and slowly transforming into Skull Kid, though that's the one thing I'm honestly the least sure of. No matter whether the game takes place in Link's unconsciousness or in reality, over the course of the game, Link confronts his main traumas. He copes with the fact that he was innocently forced into the events of Ocarina of Time in the swamp by saving the monkey. He copes with the loss of his stronger adult self in a snow area when he finally puts the crying child to sleep. He copes with the loss of his childhood by returning the Sora children from the pirates. In the Kana Canyon, he symbolically goes through the 5 stages of grief before he finally copes with Zelda sending him away from Hyrule in the Stone Tower, the most hurtful trauma and the one that released Majora into the world. That's one layer of the story. At the same time, the 3-day cycle is a Buddhist metaphor for Link being reborn. Every time the cycle is reset, Link is symbolically reborn. During those cycles, we help the people of Termina, which brings us to the quote, "With every good deed, a child takes one step closer to adulthood." Us helping the people of Termina cope with their own trauma brings us closer to Buddhist enlightenment. We gain masks for helping the people. Those masks are symbolically karma. It's the sum of all the good deeds we did. Whenever we are reborn, the suffering of the people in Termina continues. No good deed stays permanent in this world, which fits with the Buddhist idea of all life being suffering. The masks stay with us, however, through each new incarnation of Link, symbolizing karma he acquired in past lives. I believe that the side quests are designed to represent different forms of the truest and most hurtful forms of suffering that people can potentially go through in their lives. You know, a father who doesn't get to see his child grow up, 2 star-crossed lovers unable to find each other, the creative who falls to alcohol, the father whose son dies, and so on. I believe they literally had a brainstorming session in the office one day, trying to come up with the most terrible things that causes people to become traumatized. When they had this fun list, they started to think about how they can twist and turn those things into metaphors, so that we are still able to pick up what they want to convey without the audience being able to really put their fingers onto it, since it's still a Zelda game with an ESBR rating of E for everyone. They implemented those traumas mainly as the side quests in the game. The main quest is about Link coping with his own trauma. Helping the people of Termina is Link helping other people cope with their traumas. Which brings us to what I believe to be the core message of Majora's Mask. The core theme of the game, and what I believe Aonuma is trying to say through all the weirdness, the symbolism, and the dreamlike quality of Majora's Mask, is that we can heal ourselves by helping others heal. The main quest is about Link healing his trauma, the side quests are about Link helping other people heal their trauma. The side quests are rewarded with masks that represent karma in a Buddhist metaphor, or simply his good deeds in a more grounded sense. Finally, after having healed his trauma, Link enters the moon, which represents his own mind, where he confronts Majora, his own dark self, under a Buddhist Bodhi tree, a symbol of awakening and spiritual growth. If Link didn't collect all the masks, the Majora fight is really difficult, but still doable, which I believe to be a symbolism for Link really struggling to finally put the darkness in himself to rest, but which he ultimately still manages to do. If Link helped all the people in Termina, however, then he can now sell the masks he gathered previously to the 4 Moon Children and is rewarded with the Fierce Deity mask. Selling the masks is a symbol for Link trading in all his karma. The Fierce Deity mask represents enlightenment and Link's path to Nirvana. The blade that Link carries when wearing this mask is literally the symbol for infinity, infinity being thematically linked with the idea of Nirvana. Link becomes an adult when wearing the mask, symbolizing that he's now grown up. If Link wears this mask, the fight against Majora becomes incredibly easy. I believe this is a symbolism for Link having a much easier time confronting his own darkness and coping with his own trauma because he helped so many other people heal before. After you sold all the masks, you will become happy yourself. Have faith is a sentence in Ocarina that very much resembles trading in the masks to the 4 Moon Children. Which brings us to the Moon Children and their 4 questions. Those 4 questions are the thing in Majora's Mask's story that had me puzzled the longest. In the Moon, we sell the children the masks. After we sold them enough masks, there is a small gameplay section where each of the main transformations is used one final time. Afterwards, we meet the children again and they ask us a question. The questions are the following. Your friends. What kind of people are they? I wonder, do those people think of you as a friend? You? What makes you happy? I wonder what makes you happy. Does it make other people happy too? The right thing. What is it? I wonder, if you do the right thing, does it make everybody happy? And finally, your true face. What kind of face is it? I wonder, the face under the mask, is that your true face? So, figuring out what the heck those questions are supposed to mean in the context of the game took me a while, but I have a theory on what the game is trying to say with them. The game is about Link coping with his trauma. In the beginning, we play as Link that is traumatized by the events of Ocarina of Time. By the end, we play as Link who has processed all the horrible things that happened to him. The questions start to make sense if we ask them directly to the 2 different Links. Here's how I believe the Link of Ocarina of Time would have answered those questions. The "do your friends think of you as a friend" question is something the Ocarina of Time Link probably would have answered with no. Navi left him and Zelda sent him away after all. The "does the thing that makes you happy make other people happy as well" question is once again a question that the Link of Ocarina of Time would probably answer with no. What would have made this Link happy would have been to stay in the Kakariko forest, but that certainly wouldn't have made other people happy, it would have led to the destruction of the world. The next question is the same question in reverse. It's the question about what the right thing is and if doing the right thing makes everybody happy. To the Link of Ocarina of Time, the right thing was it to stand up against Ganondorf and to fight him. But the answer to the question is once again a no, because doing the right thing did not make everyone happy. It led to Link becoming traumatized. The final kid asks us if the face behind our mask is our true face. We aren't wearing a mask when he asks us this, so this question is a metaphorical question that I read to mean if we are true to ourselves. There is no way to answer this question for the Link of Ocarina of Time for us, but since all the other 3 questions were a no, I'm very much assuming that this is a no as well. Awesome. Now let's take a look at those 4 questions again, but this time let's try to answer them as the Link at the end of Majora's Mask. So, do Link's friends think of him as a friend? I'd say so. The people he helped in Termina and Tuttle probably all consider him to be a friend. Does the thing that makes Link happy make other people happy too? Well, in my reading, helping other people is what heals Link's trauma, so I'd say this is a yes again. Helping people made him happy. The next question is whether doing the right thing is making everybody happy, to which the answer is once again yes. Doing the right thing probably means helping other people. Contrary to Ocarina, helping the people of Termina actually made Link happy. Which brings us to the final question, whether the face behind Link's mask is his true face, which we again can't know with certainty, but I'm guessing this time the answer is a yes as well. Link is truly himself at the end of the game. As I understand it, the questions of the Moon Children are here to symbolize Link's growth over the course of the game. At the beginning he was mentally devastated, but at the end he's at peace. Alright, so with this, there is only one thing left to do for us. Confront Majora and defeat our own darkness. The battle is a really cool fight. I especially love the dance moves that Majora starts to do after a while. It's great. Once Majora is defeated, The moon dissolves into rainbow, which we could theoretically read as Link's ego dissolving, but won't, because we already used up today's budget for Buddhist metaphors for reaching enlightenment. We see the people of Termina cheer the giants and get the following title card. Dawn of a new day. This one always gets to me. It's so special to see that finally a new day has dawned after being trapped in Majora's Mask's oppressive circle for so long. The fairies tell us that we're finally awake. Skull Kid now realizes that the giants are still his friends and haven't forgotten about him. The implication here is that Link realizes that Zelda is still his friend and hasn't forgotten about him either. The happy mask salesman appears and takes Majora's mask. The evil spirit has finally left it. He bids us farewell and asks us if we shouldn't return home ourselves. And then he says one more thing, something really interesting. Whenever there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting may not need to last forever. Whether parting is forever or only for a short time is up to you. I believe this sentence is key to the entire story, and once again, it works on several layers at once, on three to be precise. On the one hand, it means quite literally what he says, that Link is about to leave Termina, but that he's free to return if he wishes so. On the second layer, it implies that Link is now free to choose to return to Hyrule if he wishes so. Finally, it works as a Buddhist metaphor for enlightenment as well. Link is now enlightened, he's free to choose whether he wants to be reborn again or if he wants to enter Nirvana. Finally, Link and his fairy are parted once again. But there is a difference in the symbolism this time. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Navi left Link behind. This time, however, it is Link that leaves his metaphorical guide behind. This time Link himself decides that he doesn't need a guide anymore. And given the quote about parting by the happy salesman we just heard, I assume that Link is free to return to his guide should he ever need to. The carnival begins and the credits start to roll. We get a final shot of the people of Termina who are now leaving their traumas behind. The Soras are singing. The monkey and the Dekus are at peace. The old woman and the thief are friends. Anju and Kafei are finally getting married, but not everything is happy. The final shot shows us the Deku butler, still mourning the death of his son. And with this, Majora's Mask comes to a close. Life is incredibly unpredictable, and while I ultimately believe that we are in charge of our own fates, we're certainly not in total control. It is almost impossible to live a life without encountering traumatic experiences in one form or another. You know, every single one of us is just one bad car accident away from being dead or severely injured. All our loved ones could be developing a serious illness while we're speaking. Our friends could turn their backs on us. Our lovers could leave us behind, and our dreams and hopes could go on to stay unfulfilled. Everything that we take for granted can be taken away from us. But even if we somehow end up belonging to the very few lucky ones that manage to live their lives without ever encountering any traumatic experiences, there is still no way around the fact that I, you, and everyone you ever meet will die one day. The reason I'm bringing this up isn't to be a total downer or anything. The reason I bring it up is because I believe it is important to get a subtle reminder every once in a while on how fleeting and vulnerable life actually is, and that everything we love today will come to an end. Because remembering those things puts our struggles into perspective. The stress at work, the small fluff we fight over with our partner, the toxic pleb in our League of Legends game, the friend with whom we are quarreling with for the pettiest of reasons. The stuff we spend so much time worrying about is often so stunningly meaningless when we're suddenly confronted with real suffering. The real suffering of, say, a parent who doesn't get to see their child grow up, the suffering of permanently separated lovers, or the suffering of a mother who lost a child. Being confronted with real trauma and real suffering is ultimately something that allows us to forgive and forget all the small things that ultimately don't matter. Confrontation with real suffering is, interestingly enough, often what sets the process of healing and forgiveness in motion. So just to be super duper absolutely clear here, I'm not saying that trauma is a good thing or anything. Honestly, screw people that tell you your trauma is good for you. What I want to say is that life is devoid of any meaning if we aren't aware of how fleeting it is. Remembering that every once in a while, in healthy doses, can actually help us to get our values and priorities straight. It can help us forgive things that happen to us, and it can help us heal our own emotional wounds. In my opinion, Majora's Mask is such an incredible game because it somehow manages to connect me with those realities of suffering and the fact that life is fleeting and vulnerable. As I understand the game, its central question is how to heal from trauma, and the answer the game gives is that we can heal our trauma by helping others heal theirs. Funnily enough, the game somehow manages to literally do exactly this thing on a micro scale for me, helping the people of Termina heal their trauma. Weirdly enough, has something healing in reality. It's almost as if the game somehow manages to transcend its own themes. Majora's Mask is far from a flawless game. Its biggest problem is ironically how it sometimes wastes our time. But while the game is full of flaws, the one thing it is good at, it is so incredibly, absurdly good at, that I'm willing to forgive and forget every single flaw. Ultimately, I do not think that Majora's Mask is the best Zelda game. But I do believe that Majora's Mask is the best piece of art that Nintendo has ever created. In the aftermath of his staged execution, Dostoevsky had the opportunity to write a letter to his brother. Here's a quick excerpt of what one of the world's greatest novelists and an early existentialist thinker had to say directly after surviving what he believed to be his own execution. If anyone has bad memories of me, if I have quarreled with anyone, if I have created in anyone an unpleasant impression, tell them they should forget it if you manage to meet them. There is no gall or spite in my soul. I should dearly love to embrace any one of my former friends at this moment. When I look back at the past and think how much time has been wasted in vain, how much time was lost in illusions, in errors, in idleness, in ignorance of how to live, how I did not value time, how often I sinned against my heart and spirit, my heart bleeds. Life is a gift. Life is happiness. Each minute might have been an age of happiness, if only the youth knew. Now changing my life, I am being reborn into a new form, brother. I swear to you that I shall not lose hope, and shall preserve my spirit and heart in purity. I shall be reborn to a better thing. So, for whatever reason, whenever I'm playing Majora's Mask, I always have this letter in mind. I have no idea how to get to the outro from here. Ray. So here we have it, my little planned 40 minutes retrospective about Majora's Mask gone rogue. So before we wrap this up, just a couple of things. First, a huge and gigantic thank you to all my incredible Patreons whose names are currently scrolling by. Videos like this one are an insane amount of work to produce, while long-form content has a really tough time surviving on YouTube. The wonderful ladies and gentlemen whose names are currently scrolling by are doing the heavy lifting and making sure that I am able to make videos like this one. A huge thanks for that. Second, I want to shout out a couple of people in the Zelda community and beyond on whose work this video is built upon. So first, shout out to Reddit user The Goldilocks, who wrote a really interesting piece about the musical theme of the Water Dungeon, in which I learned about the similarities between the Reflection Room and the Inside of the Moon, alongside many other really interesting things. It's a great read, there's a link to it in the description. Shout out to the original Zelda Universe theory from 2006 about the Stone Tower's symbolism of blasphemy, there's a link to this theory in the description as well. Finally, shout out to YouTuber Max Darrett, who, funnily enough, released a video about the Buddhist themes of Majora's Mask just a couple of weeks ago. It's a really interesting watch where I learned tons of interesting things. Hooray! And with this, it's time for us to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching this little video. I hope you got at least some entertainment and value out of it. If you liked it, liking it back would be a gentleman's move. If you're interested in more long-form content discussing games, subscribing might be a good idea. And if you truly loved the video and want to make sure that content like this can survive on the platform, then there's also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Alright, thanks for watching, until next time. Lots of hugs.